Alright, it's time for another early age full house game. I will be playing Mekone, and I'm going to do a whirlwind tour of the nation and a little bit of discussion on my pretender build. I didn't bother with this last time because the plan was pretty much survive the early game with an expander. There wasn't a whole lot of plan beyond that. There still is not a fully formed plan for this build or this game, but enough of one that I guess warrants a little bit of discussion. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to be playing Mekone. They are based kind of on, Spartans, and they have these gigantes, who are, they're good troops, who are quite expensive though, both in terms of resources, gold, and you can't get a ton of them every turn. So I think you're limited to 5 in your capital and then 2 in every other fort. So, it's very difficult to mass these guys up, but they have very high protection, for regular units. They take buffs really well, right? They have a little bit of natural protection, but since most of their protection is coming from their armor, and then most spells buff natural protection, these guys can get pretty disgusting in terms of their protection. They're size 4, so normally their attack density would kind of suffer, but these guys have formation fighter, so you can actually fit 2 of these, cheat a little bit if you will, and actually get like 8 size points into a single square. So that definitely helps them a lot in terms of, receiving harassment, and then, dishing out damage. And then they have, a magic weapon. They're giants, so their strength is really high, and they deal a lot of damage. Their skills are solid, nothing amazing. They're not sacred. Mekone actually has no sacred troops. So they come in 2 flavors. More heavily armored one, pretty slow map move. Combat speed is decent because they're giants, which move faster. And then a more lightly armored version, which have pretty good map move, and pretty solid combat speed. But the protection is significantly lower. Defense skills a little bit higher, because of that lighter equipment. But probably I think you're going to mostly want to recruit the more heavily armored versions. I think really the only reason, because they cost the same amount of gold. And I mean, the movement and everything is nice, but this is a pretty significant jump in terms of their protection. So these guys are going to be a heck of a lot more survivable. I think the main reason that you would recruit these guys is they just have lower resource cost. So early on, these are probably going to be your go-to if you're trying to recruit these gigantes. And these guys actually excel at expansion because this is enough protection and with their higher hit points to kind of see them through most indie types. So this is what I'm going to be using for expansion. It's not the only way that Mekone can expand. They have pretty good expansion and some flexibility because their Helit troops, their slave units are good enough to expand with. Certainly you can expand with peltasts who are not particularly exceptional. They have really terrible protection, but they have really low resource cost, really low recruitment point cost, and are pretty cheap in terms of gold. So you can just shit these out in just truly astounding numbers. And so as long as you handle the attrition that you're going to be taking while expanding, you can totally expand probably just with peltasts. Honestly, they get a javelin and everything. Their skills are fine. Their morale is a problem, but it gets boosted by most of Mekone's commanders who have this taskmaster, which boosts the morale of slave units only. And that's kind of the case for most of Mekone's human troops. So they have the peltasts, and then they have 2 flavors of hoplites. These guys with a shorter spear, lighter equipment, a little faster. Generally, I think, it's the same story. I think you're going to want the more heavily armored guys with the longer spear. Their protection isn't as good as the giants, but 17 is still really good for the early age for regular troops. Kind of all the same, issues like so-so, skills, morale, not good. These guys can be hard to mass because they do require, a lot of resources, so you can't get nearly as many of these guys as you can peltasts, but they don't really need any recruitment points, so it's just the resources that you have to worry about with those. And then, don't bother recruiting these. Yeah, so the problem with these guys is that they're not slaves. And this being dominions, and since we're playing, the awful Spartan, hoplites who hate humanity, And our slavers, these guys just aren't very useful for us. They're essentially the same as like the slave peltasts in terms of stats, but they just cost more upkeep. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody knows how to use these properly. Speaking of units that maybe are difficult to use properly, there's these guys who are kind of entertaining, and your only ranged option other than peltasts, they throw this discus, which does a ton of damage. Actually has like okay range, like 21 squares. Their precision is actually better than I thought. Yeah, maybe, I don't really use these guys too much, but maybe should have given them a better look. I think they're also limited recruitment, so it's like they're hard to mass. At least they don't require a lot of resources. They just have no protection. So like if somebody gets in close, I don't think they have very many discuses. Yeah, like only ammunition 4. And then yeah, the weapon actually has like a negative to its precision. So like, okay, this guy has pretty good precision, but the actual attack itself is only 9. These discuses deal a lot of damage, so it's like, you have your heavily armored troops that can often just kind of shrug off the javelins. Nobody really shrugs off the bronze discus. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. These guys are interesting, at least. And they also share one other thing about all of Mekone's Gigante troops. They refuse to be led by anybody that's smaller than them. They're very proud. And very haughty. So anyway, you really only have one human commander, so it's not the end of the world. But like, if you do some indie commander recruitment, I don't know if there's any indie giants you can recruit. Probably somewhere, some site, but it's very rare. So it can be a little annoying to lead around, your Gigante troops. Because you have like some random indie commander and you're like, oh, I'll just put them on. No, you won't. You will not put them on that filthy human. You have to use somebody like this guy, who's, he's a regular commander. Like, he's fine. He's got the Taskmaster, 80 leadership, which is nice. So he can do formations. Mekone does get a scout, so that's cool. Mage-wise, you're all elemental magic, so you're completely locked out of sorcery paths, which is a bit problematic for the late game, since arguably the sorcery paths are better in the late game. So that's something to consider, when building your pretender and etc. Most of your mages are sacred. I think the only one that is not are the Cyclopses. So they're not sacred. Everybody else is sacred. Most of them are priests with the exception of this Polemarch. So he is sacred, but he's not a priest, so he can't bless himself, which is a little annoying at times. But anyway, definitely a mage bless, I think, is a consideration on Mekone, since almost all of your mages are sacred. They'll definitely benefit from that. Also, I think of note is these guys are probably one of the best, out-of-the-box thugs that there are. So, going for a thug bless, I think is, totally valid with Mekone. These guys are, just really cool in general. Honestly, like, we'll see with my build. I don't feel like I don't really support these guys. If I were to play Mekone again, I don't even know if it's the best way to play it, but it would just be fun, to make these guys absolutely kick ass. Because they're just cool. Pretty solid skills, actually like surprisingly low morale, so that's definitely a consideration. Solid paths, like for a thug, earth is great, fire maybe a little less so, but one of the cool things about having fire access is these guys are combat caster. So they're just way more likely to cast spells when they're in melee, and they're less likely to be interrupted, and then they also take less fatigue from armor encumbrance for spell casting. So like these guys actually will cast like kind of some point blank spells that are notoriously difficult to get other casters to cast like once enemies get close. Which really opens up like some cool options with them, and the fire is definitely not that Earth absolutely has some close range spells that are pretty cool, but the fire really opens up some nasty stuff that these guys can do. They also get formation fighter. It matters less for them, but you can stack 2 of them on the same square. So like these guys I feel like really kind of want to operate in pairs, which is something like I was very inexperienced with Mekone when I first started this playthrough. I think we're like 40 or 50 turns in now, so yeah, I've learned a ton. I was actually going to sit this full house out, but last second, decided to jump in. Mekone is not considered like one of the stronger nations, just I think because they struggle a little bit late game, and they have a few features that cause them trouble. They did actually get buffed quite a bit in a patch a while back now. So yeah, they're certainly much better and a lot of fun to play, I found. Anyway, yeah, these polemarchs, are quite excellent. They can only be recruited in the capital, and that is something to consider for Mekone. Like, they're pretty capital focused, right? So these last 3 mages here are capital only, so there is some contention, for what you recruit. And one of the things that the patch did, this unit also used to be capital only, so that's pretty ridiculous. And now these guys can be recruited from anywhere. These guys are probably your best battle mage. They are kind of expensive. A lot of Mekone stuff. Most giant nations, things just tend to be more expensive. These guys are also slow to recruit, so it's going to take you two turns to bring these guys in. But they're pretty good. They're guaranteed, fire or earth. And then they get a linked random. So like they're either going to be fire 3, earth 3, or they could get 2 earth or 2 air. And the 2 air guys can cast cloud trapeze, so that makes them really effective anti-raiders. You can actually kind of gear these guys out. They are a giant, so it's much easier to make giant units effective thugs. So while he needs gear, he needs all the gear, right? He's got a fist and robes. So don't send him out naked. But if you give him some gear, he's going to carry your bless. He can bless himself. Like, yeah, these guys are totally capable anti-raiders. You won't have a ton of them because you're just not going to have a ton of them, period. And then of course it's only the air 2 guys that are going to be your counter raiders. The air 2 guys they're all going to be in high demand. This is a good mage. So the more of these guys you can get out, the better. You also have, let's see, these guys who pretty much just your research, your go-to research guy. They're not great researchers. At least their upkeep is not terrible, right? Because they're sacred. But they're just, and it's really kind of rough because it's like they just get 1 path in either fire or earth. And that's not really a very useful mage. You give them some gems, you can do stuff with them, but yeah, these guys are not great. They're also old. That is like a bit of a problem for Mekone, although maybe not as much as I originally thought. So like these guys are pretty much, I think they're guaranteed, to be old. And your E4s more or less guaranteed to be old. And the E4s are better certainly than your researchers, but and the E4s, they research okay as well. They cost a little bit more, but they're a more effective mage for the most part. So they're guaranteed, fire 1, earth 1, a lot of fire, a lot of earth on Mekone. Your air access is a little light, and you do get a little bit of water, but water is probably like your weakest elemental path. So anyway, guaranteed, 1 fire, 1 earth. And then they get, 1 more random, so they can either be fire 2, definitely useful, earth 2, definitely useful. The triple split across air, there's some forging possibilities. Site searching is kind of okay, but, there are things they can cast, but it's a little harder to use those guys. And yeah, they're always going to be old, which is going to be rough because they tend to get diseases. Like every winter they have to pass a check, and if they fail it, they'll get like an affliction, including possibly a disease, which is a death sentence. So it's definitely rough if a lot of your mages are old. But that said, like the Archons are not old. It is a little deceptive. Now, I mean, they're decently far off from their max age, but I don't think it shows on this screen. Your max age gets reduced by like every path of fire magic that you have. So some of these guys, like especially like the ones that ran them into fire, might end up being old. So it's a little bit more of a problem than this screen would indicate. But your polemarchs are pretty much safe. Yeah, they're a long way off from old age, and like these are their paths. So you're not gonna have old polemarchs. The elder cyclopses, no worry about the old age. And then, yeah, speaking of the elder cyclopses, they're super cool, slow to recruit. The polemarchs actually aren't, so you can like spit one of these, per turn out of your capital. Assuming you can keep paying for them. They are sacred, so the upkeep is not as bad as it, might look. But bringing them in is not cheap, and it's not a low upkeep. So anyway, but these guys, a bit more of a luxury. They're not sacred, so they cost a lot to bring in, and they cost a lot to just have around. So you're not gonna want to crank out a ton of these guys. But they get pretty cool paths. So also we fire 2, earth 2. You see that a lot on Mekone. But they are guaranteed a little bit of air, which is nice. And then they get some randoms. Really just the one random you can kind of count on, 10%. You're not going to make that many of these guys. So, hey, if you get it, it's cool, but certainly don't count on this extra random. This is one possible, water access avenue. The Air 2 guys, obviously very useful because same thing, they can cloud trapeze. And then, Earth 3 and Fire 3, that's cool. Those are good mages. These guys are extra nice. They provide a resource bonus, probably something I should take a little bit more advantage of in my game. Usually it's not too much of an issue depending on your build for getting the Gigantes out, but for your human troops, if you're trying to get a lot of those heavy hoplites, a little bit of extra resources is a nice bonus, although the numbers you're going to have these guys, that is not really an overriding concern. They do have Mastersmith, so they can forge items at one level higher than what's displayed. So this guy can forge an Air 2 item even no matter what randoms he gets. But there's no discount in terms of, so they're not I forget what the discount ability is called, but anyway, it's full price for you for forging items, which is too bad, because you probably will be forging items, because your polemarchs are really good thugs. They certainly would want some items, and then these guys, they have pretty good hit points. Their skills are a little rough, and their protection is not great, so they definitely need gear, but arguably kind of low tier super combatants certainly could be used in that role. So anyway, yeah, they're really cool. And then let's see, I think the last guy, the Basilisk, he's also cap only, so you're probably not going to be recruiting too many of them, just because the Polemarchs and the Cyclopses, I think, are probably better. Not that this guy is a bad mage. He's Fire 2, Earth 2, very popular in Mekone. He's slow to recruit as well, right? So he's going to lock down your capital for longer, which is rough. He is old, so that also sucks. But he is your most reliable. He's your only guaranteed water access, right? So it's your Cyclopses could random water, but I think it's only a 25% chance, maybe a little greater because of the 10% random, but not likely, basically, not overwhelmingly likely. So anyway, this is your way into any kind of water. And he has a chance to be water 2. Definitely your only shot. Wow. Okay, not your only shot at water 2, but your only realistic shot at water 2. So yeah, usually I get 1 or 2 of these guys, for some site searching and stuff like that, a little bit of diversity purposes, but probably you're not going to want to get too many of these guys. He is your only priest level 2. No level 3 holy recruitables for Mekone, which isn't too much of an issue. It does make throne claims a little more challenging, but that's fine. And you don't have a big mass of sacred units that you're going to need to bless up, and so the mages can mostly just bless themselves. If you really need to get your bless on your mages, with the important exception of the polemarchs. So they need somebody to come along with them to bless them up, assuming you want them to get the advantage of your bless. You're going some sort of thug bless. There is an item, I think it's Holy Water Flask. It's a miscellaneous item that you can slot in, and it just auto blesses sacred units. Definitely a consideration for these polemarchs, so that you don't have to send some squishy priest mage with them that could die. So yeah, and then of course that item takes water gems, so another reason that you're going to want this guy to do some water site searching for you. So yeah, that covers the mages, the units. They do have a few extra national abilities, not bonuses. Some of them are bonuses. So their Dominion gets a conflict bonus. So when you're trying to remove enemy Dominion, your priests preach at a higher level, I believe. Certainly you get, most of them are Inquisitors, right? So that's definitely the case. And then I think this actually might be separate, this conflict bonus, where it's just more likely that your Dominion check is going to win out. So it can be a little easier for you to spread Dominion, against other players. And certainly, going some like really high Dominion strength, maybe even some Dominion kills, right, where you just preach away all of another player's Dominion is something that's on the table for Mekone. I don't really play that way myself, haven't really done that, so not sure how effective that is, in comparison, but, if you wanted to try a strategy like that, Mekone is, certainly a candidate. Although, they really only have, like, their priests aren't very good at raising their own Dominion level, which is a little rough. Their buildings, right, so they get these advanced fortified cities, which sounds good, but in my opinion is not good. The bonus to these is their palisades get 2 commander points. So normally, when you build the first level of fort, it's a palisade, and it only gets 1 commander point. So like you'd be able to recruit, say, one of these guys. This would be 1 turn, right? But most mages 2 commander points. So this would take 2 turns to recruit this guy out of a palisade. But with Mekone's forts, once you get a palisade up, you get those full 2 recruitment points. So you can start recruiting mages, or polemarchs. Well, polemarchs can only recruit in the capital, but you can at least recruit these 2 mages, in 1 turn out of your palisades, which is nice. Like that is nice, but they cost extra, so it's 750 gold to build your first level of fort rather than 600. That's rough, especially for me because I suck at building infrastructure. But anyway, something to consider for Mekone. The other problem, which is kind of a big issue for them, is their forts increase unrest. So they have a couple of extra events. Every fall, they declare war on their slave population, the Helots. You have to have an E4 present in every fort, otherwise they don't get to kick off this war, this sacred war, every fall, and you get additional unrest. You always get some unrest, and so a lot of times you want to fort really valuable provinces so you can protect them. Not so much the case with Mekone, because if you fort a valuable province, then you're guaranteed to generate unrest there, every year and reduce your income. So income can be a bit of a problem for Mekone, especially because, well, your capital, guess what? That's a fort. So guaranteed, your most important income province, right from the get-go, you're just going to be making less money than everybody else. Well, not about everybody else, but most other factions. So yeah, this is kind of a big problem, and you definitely need patrollers as Mekone, kind of in all your forts, I would say, and it's just kind of something that you always need to consider, and something that you have to play around with Mekone. Let's see. In terms of gem income, it's a little bit spread. So they get 1 air gem, which is nice. You can get alquils, research boosting items early on if you want. And you're at least guaranteed some air income, and you have some air site searchers. Then you get 1 earth gem from that. And then, so 3 earth gems total, and 2 fire gems and an air gem, a little bit of extra resources too, which is super important for Mekone on your capital from this site. So yeah, cool stuff. That's Mekone. All right, and then this is what we're going to be doing with Mekone. So this is a build that I have stolen and modified to make worse off of that list of, pretender gods I'll link to. I am certainly I'm no expert Dominions player, and I'm not very good at Mekone. Definitely improving from playing them. But yeah, so I did not feel confident to, just come up with a completely, unique pretender myself. That said, this is heavily modified from what I pulled. The main thing that is fairly close to the original is the scales. The scales I do really like. That part of the build I feel like has worked out pretty well. I find with a lot of my builds, the more I play it, the less I like it. So I was fairly happy with this going into it, but definitely looking back, I think there are some serious problems. So let's talk scales first. These guys, And so the main thing is, full turmoil, right? So this is as negative as you can go in this. You can go neutral, or you can go all the way up in order. And this basically just takes advantage of the fact that so this generates unrest in your land. And as Mekone, it's like, well, you're already going to be generating unrest, so screw it, this is kind of, free design point, not free, but cheaper than normal design points for you to take advantage of. The original build was only a Turmoil 2, and I've gone down to 3 to kind of help pay for some stuff. The original build is Imprisoned, whereas I've gone Dormant, which is, a major cost to come out earlier, right? Dormant gods come out at around turn 12, give or take. Imprisoned gods, I think, is turn 32, 36, roughly speaking. So, a lot later that's going to be coming out. And, I mostly did this because, this is a full house game, so it's a tighter than normal map. This Titan chassis, she has a lot of hit points. In terms of combat, she's not super impressive. But, she has nature paths. Given her, I think she normally starts with all 3 of these paths. It's very expensive usually to add additional paths to Titans, so you usually don't want to do that, but it's Dominions, so do what you want. I'm sure there are reasons to put extra paths on Titans. But anyway, so she can give herself regeneration with really high hit points. It's really nice. She's going to be hard to kill. She has a really powerful and fairly large poison cloud. So she'll just poison all units around her, which can make her a little bit difficult to combine with in terms of, Mekone's troops and mages and etc. But it is a threat vector that, people don't really expect out of Mekone. Mekone has no nature normally. So, poison is just not really a thing they do. So having her, pop out at turn 12, maybe things have gone poorly. Mekone isn't really a rush target because the Gigantes are so good. But, they're not the strongest faction, and, without any sacred units, they're also not going to be hell blessing some sacreds and just having some really terrifying units, hit you early. So it's not impossible that we're going to need a little bit of extra help, around turn 12 if things are going a little rough. So, having her pop out around that time, I think is going to, be really useful. So that's nice. But then, in terms of the scales, return to the scales, full productivity. So I think that is really important as Mekone. This just is going to get you more resources in all of your provinces, including all your forts. Your Gigante hoplites are very resource intensive. The human hoplites that you're going to want are very resource intensive. So I think this is a pretty important one for Mekone. Heat 3, this is early age. Niflheim is out there. It's just Mekone is not particularly fast, so we don't get too much advantage from not having snow on the ground, because that's one of the advantages of Heat 3 is that, even in winter, oftentimes there'll be no snow on the ground, and snow will slow down your movement, unless you're specifically set up for it, which Mekone definitely is not. So this is mostly just for the extra design points. This is going to hurt our income, so it's a trade-off. You certainly don't have to go Heat 3 as Mekone. We do a lot of fire magic, and fire magic likes it, for things to be hot. So, that's definitely a consideration. Growth 3, pretty standard, almost every faction will benefit quite a bit from growth. It's arguably the best income scale long term. This is a large game, right? All the nations are in it. So, it will go long, assuming it don't get knocked out early. So, growth is just, very important. Anytime you're cutting, anytime you're not running growth 3, you should probably have a decent reason for that, right? It's don't, have a plan if you're not going growth 3. So the other part is luck 3. Right, and luck is one of the scales that people just argue back and forth about. Is it worth it? Is it not? I haven't tried a luck build in multiplayer, so I just kind of wanted to do it. Certainly, it's a lot more pleasant, to get nice events than bad events. So sometimes, just from a fun standpoint, I think luck can be better. But specifically for Mekone, since our income is going to be kind of screwed up anyway from our turmoil and then just our forts generating all the unrest, I think this is a really good option, right? Because you can get just random treasures from luck. So the luck is maybe a stronger pick than normal on Mekone since our income is going to be a little messed up, through the normal avenues. And then we've just gone Magic 1. I think the original build was Magic 2. Giant nations, I find, can struggle a little bit with research, it seems like. I don't have a ton of experience playing them, but you just have fewer mages. Now, they do more research, but yeah, just oftentimes it seems like with the giant nations, it's just a little tougher to research. And then, of course, when you have magic scales, that boosts your research. For each mage, by the level of magic, so like each of our mages is going to research one faster, every turn, in places that we get our scales. And to that end, right, of course, your scales don't matter at all if you don't push your Dominion out. And so our Dominion strength is 6. I think I went down 1 from the original build. 7 would be nicer. The stronger your Dominion is, the easier it is to push it out. The faster it's going to move out, and the less likely it is, to get knocked back by enemy Dominion. And if you don't have your Dominion out there, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter that you have this nice luck and growth and whatever. It's like, because those skills never show up because your Dominion isn't out there. So anyway, Dominion 6 isn't incredibly strong, but it's not weak, so I don't think we'll have too much trouble pushing our Dominion out. So yeah, all this stuff I think is pretty solid, and definitely, I don't think it's the only way to play Mekone, but I think it's a good set of scales that you could probably do a lot of different things with Mekone. In terms of this chassis specifically, one of the nice things is that she covers all of our magic access problems except for Astral. So we don't have any way to get Astral. I don't really have a specific plan yet in terms of how to get into Astral. So that's a gap. But, Mekone has no death, they have no nature, and they have no blood. She's got all that. So she's going to help, in terms of site searching, or anything like that, right? She can help get us into these paths that we don't normally have. So that's a really nice advantage of this chassis, like on Mekone. Let's see here. She also has, just a couple random things. So she's an adept crossbreeder, and we do have Nature Blood, which allows for the crossbreeding spell. And Mekone is a Greek-themed nation, so they have access to a unit called Cares, or I don't know if that's probably not the proper pronunciation, but anyway. They're a unit that you can turn into a commander, has some blood paths, so a small blood economy is not off the table for us, or just for Mekone in general. And Mekone, crossbreeding is probably not the strongest spell, but Mekone does kind of have need of, just patrol chaff, so, they'll be useful for that. It's also just an interesting and fun spell, and you get better results in luck, so, we might do some crossbreeding, we'll see. And then she also just has a chance to summon monsters. I think it's tied. I think she just has to be in friendly domain. I don't think domain strength matters, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, she just gets like some random monsters, most of which suck, but a few of which are interesting, and yeah, we'll see how we can work those in. In terms of the Bless itself, this is the part of the build that definitely could use a rework. I don't think it's all bad, but probably the number one thing to drop is unaging. So I just hate it when my mages get diseased from being old, and then especially if you get like a really nice random, right, in terms of their path access. And we do have a decent amount of like random rolls on our mages. We don't have a lot of mages where it's just like what you see is what you get. So there is somewhat a luck aspect to getting certain types of mages for Mekone. And then to see those guys die, because they get diseased, I hate that. That said, I think a lot of Mekone's most important mages aren't really actually affected too much by aging, right? So it's like your researchers, that are just the single path mages, they get diseased. Your E4s, which aren't so important, they get diseased. Yeah, your Basilisk might get diseased, but it's not the end of the world. Just like recruit another one. It's like your Polemarchs and your Elder Cyclopses you don't have to worry about. The Archons are maybe a wobbler, right? Your Fire guys might be old, but most of them aren't going to be old. So it's like your 3 most important mages, like this doesn't actually really matter for them. So I think this was a mistake in retrospect, but it's a luxury pick. Some nations really do struggle with having old mages, and this is a strong consideration. But I think for Mekone, this was a mistake. So I think in the future would certainly drop this. The other problem I would say with this bless overall is that it's a little unfocused. So right, this is going to help some of our mages, but it doesn't really help our polemarchs. Blood Surge is nice, and it's going to help our polemarchs. It doesn't really help our mages so much. So Blood Surge is just when they get a kill, you boost their attack, strength, defense, and reinvigoration a little bit. The only thing that's good for the mages there really is the reinvigoration, and it's only one, so it's kind of incidental. So Blood Surge is not like bad on Mekone, right? Like this is useful for thugs to have, absolutely, but it's a bit light for the polemarchs. The amount of work that you end up having to do to get them blessed just so they can have Blood Surge is like a little questionable. And then the other thing too is they don't actually have fantastic attack skill. So most of the time, they're going to have no problem getting a kill, right? Because they deal a ton of damage. So that's one of the big things about Blood Surge, right? Is that it does nothing for you unless you get a kill, right? So it's like sometimes you get into situations where it's just like, it's completely useless because your guys just aren't getting kills. So that's not as much of an issue for the polemarchs, but if they're up against high defense stuff, which is out there, elves, cavalry, etc., this is not so great. And then I threw on some major poison resistance, 10, so not perfect protection against foul vapors, but pretty good protection against foul vapors. I think 15, and you can pretty much ignore foul vapors. So we have 10. That's going to help our mages and our polemarchs, a bunch if we run up against foul vapors, which is always a concern. It'll help too if we try to combine with our god. I don't actually know if this is going to be enough poison resistance, to protect 100%. I didn't do enough testing there. So that was a bit of a gamble, but it'll certainly help a lot. And then this is one that I don't really hate. Like the resistances are always useful. I think, poison resistance is arguably the best one because just foul vapors is pretty ubiquitous. It's very unlikely you're going to, if in a game this big with everybody, right? It's like if you're in a smaller game and, there's nobody that can really do foul vapors, you don't have to worry about it so much. But it's something that comes up a lot. And because we have no native nature access, it's actually kind of an annoying hole like for Mekone to cover, right? Because it's like we have a lot of good elemental access, so we can forge gear and stuff, to cover our shock resistance and our fire resistance and our cold resistance, but covering the poison resistance is going to be a little tougher. There's plenty of nature indies out there, so certainly you can go that way, find some tribe or something like that, use them for their nature magic, to forge you some items that are going to cover your poison situation. But I just felt like this was going to be useful enough to be an advantage. So not the strongest bless, I would say, for Mekone, but not the worst bless either. And the chassis provides a lot of interesting advantages, and a little bit of early game defense with the dormant, and I think the scales are pretty solid. So anyway, in terms, as you can tell, I didn't really talk about an overall game plan, and that is definitely the part that is still missing. I just haven't played Mekone enough, to really have a full-fledged start-to-finish strategy. So more or less the strategy is still, survive the early game and hopefully see the late game and kind of see like what Mekone can do. So anyway, that's my take on Mekone, and this is the build that I've gone with.